What is up, everyone? This is Raphael Garcia here with Schwan Hughes for episode 160 of the MMA Ratings Podcast. As always, we want to take the time to say we hope everyone is safe and healthy out there in the world as we are in, I think, I would say day 35 of quarantine, stay at home, social distancing, et cetera, et cetera. But thank you for taking the time to check us out tonight. This is episode 160 of the MMA Ratings Podcast, where we are here to talk about all things combat sports that are going on right now. There are some news stories going on, but we're going to be talking about that and some eventual shows that have been announced. Schwan, why don't you let everybody know how you're doing?
I'm doing good, staying busy, man. Got my kids exercising. I've been surprisingly getting a lot of people who just graduated college or in college trying to get some work in training on the basketball front. So it's been really weird. Like I didn't expect to get that, but it's been a lot of guys getting ready to go pro or guys who are coming into their last year of college who want to get work in. So it's really weird just getting all these calls at this time. Very strange.
Speaking of basketball, The Last Dance, are you watching it? Yes or no?
Oh yeah, some good stuff.
I really enjoyed the first night, and I'm going to be honest here, sir. I upgraded my cable just to make sure I could watch it. I
Yeah, they
was
said
like, I was looking, I'm like, fuck, I don't have this channel. Like 5 minutes before the show, I was like, yo, Verizon, you better hook this up and hook this up within the next 5 minutes so I can make sure I can watch this thing from start to finish. It's been
yeah,
great. I can't wait to see the rest of it.
it's got like just watch episodes. It's got a high level of rewatchability. Like there's certain you watch it again, there are things you miss, even though you're really focused on it. There are little things you miss, or like I watched that like two or three times. It's like just hearing the stories and seeing some of the background information is kind of crazy. Like to have that much access.
Yeah, they did 6.1 mil, they did 6.1 million viewers on Sunday. I think they're going about it the right way though, extending it and not releasing it until every Sunday. Because I mean, I've it's went almost Tuesday, and I've continued to talk about it. And I think they're going to do the right promotion to get people to keep talking about it on like Thursday, Friday. It'll come back up, and then people will be hyped up again for it Sunday morning, Sunday night.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard not to. I mean, and you got all the LeBron and Michael Jordan fans, so it's hard to get away from it, to be quite honest.
Yeah, I'm not even here for that conversation. Not even here for it. So we have quite a bit to talk about today, though, because this is not a basketball podcast. We are talking about combat sports, and we have two topics and listener questions to dive into today. The first of which being UFC 249. So we are a go. Just I would say 90%. This event is scheduled for May 9th in Florida. They haven't announced the exact location yet, but bets were either on Las Vegas or Florida, and it will be a closed door event, and it has to adhere to social distancing guidelines. And before we dive into the questions about this, there's a lot of political development which led to this, and part of it is, obviously there's Donald Trump pushing for the economy to be reopened. He put together this panel of, I guess, quote unquote experts who was nothing more than a bunch of old white men because there are no people of color and no women on this panel, and he's pushing to get the economy opened back up. And basically, sports is one of his big platforms because sports and politics don't go together. But sports is one of his big platforms, and Dana White is one of his allies, and he's trying to get the UFC to he's pushing the UFC to open their doors as well. And in doing so, Vince McMahon and the WWE leveraged their political clout to get Florida to deem them as essential business. Now we're talking about scripted wrestling as essential business. Think about that line for a second.
Really, because it fake
But
fight.
say it
Your
again.
girl Ronda Rousey calls it. I said your girl Ronda Rousey calls it fake fighting.
Yeah, she's we should add her as a topic too, but that's a whole other conversation for another day. But the political aspect of this is that there's a super PAC called America First, I believe that's the name of it, that dedicated spending $18 million in advertising dollars, $18 million in advertising purchasing, in a push to get Donald Trump reelected in Florida in 2020. They committed to spending that money. The leader of that group is Linda McMahon, Vince McMahon's wife, who's another close ally of Donald Trump. So that's what pushed sports being deemed as essential business and opened the door for the UFC to hold UFC 249 in that venue. Now it's or in that states. So it's scheduled for May 9th, which is about 3 weeks from this weekend. Yes, 3 weeks from this weekend, 3 Saturdays. And yeah, we have a little bit to talk about. The first piece about this, Schwan, is does this surprise you? As much as we know about Florida, they've already opened up their beaches. I think Georgia did as well too. Does it surprise you that Florida is going to be the first state to step out there and get themselves in this situation?
Not really, because Florida. It seems like Florida closed down for like what, a week and a half. Because while everybody else was shutting down, there were still people on the beaches. I think they were closed like a week and a half or 2 weeks, and now there are people right back on the beaches. So I mean, if anywhere was going to go, Florida would have probably been the place. I was shocked that the UFC didn't try to use Florida as an option earlier, seeing as they were the ones who seemed to take this the least seriously out of any other state in the country.
Yeah, I agree. I thought that they were going definitely with the WWE still holding events. I expected them to try to leverage the performance center in some way, shape, or form, but they did not. But now we're at a situation where UFC 249 is still scheduled for that state, and the fight card is not official. It hasn't even been really revealed, but the plan is, as of right now, three. It was originally three title fights to be scheduled on this card. Tony Ferguson, Justin Gaethje for the interim lightweight title. Henry Cejudo versus Dominic Cruz. We'll talk about that in a second. And Amanda Nunes was scheduled to defend against Felicia Spencer, but Amanda Nunes said, "Fuck that shit. I'm out. I'm not fighting during this time." She wants a full camp and she wants to wait until the coronavirus situation passes. We got a question about that. We're going to get on in segment 3 as well too. But what are your thoughts about this potential top 3 billing of a card here, Schwan? Do you expect the UFC to come out guns blazing and put damn near every champion they can on this card, or do you expect them to maybe play a conservative just in case if some fights have to change up at last minute?
I would expect them to go all out, since unlike other sporting events, they have like a lot of stay over this. I would expect them to go all out to get as much talk and as much of a buzz as possible. I mean, if it was when we were talking about having the Khabib Gaethje fight, the reason they were thinking about Gaethje as a replacement was because this is the fight that needs to draw interest. People aren't going to pay to see Tony Ferguson fight. I don't know, Michael Johnson moves back up, or Tony Ferguson to fight. Um, I can't even think of a guy right now. They want to see a very specific type of matchup. It has to be a matchup they can sell. It has to be a matchup that people will ask for. It has to be a matchup that's going to be exciting to fans, casuals, and hardcore. So they weren't just going to give us whatever. It's got to be fights that are going to inc- create debate, whether about the competitiveness of the fight, the stakes of the fight, or in the case of a Cruz Cejudo fight, the ridiculousness of a fight. It's got to be something that's going to have talking points. So I don't think they can afford to just have a good card. They want a card that's going to, have the 3 levels of talking. Ooh, this is such a great fight. What's going to happen in the fight? And how do the big time, highly ranked, big star fighters feel about fighting in this environment? Those are all talking points that you can keep the UFC in the headlines for an extended period. And I think they want those kind of talking points.
So let's take this one. We've talked, and we're not going to do a full preview. As I mentioned, there isn't a full card, and we'll talk about that closer to the actual event date, probably that Tuesday before. But let's take a minute to talk about some of these fights here. We've already talked about Justin Gaethje and Tony Ferguson at length, so I don't want to dive back into that one until we go into our fight preview on closer to the actual event. But I do want to talk about this Dominic Cruz Henry Cejudo fight. So Henry Cejudo was originally supposed to face off against Jose Aldo, but Aldo's not going to be able to make the card, as a lot of Brazilian fighters saw they were unable to get work visas because the U.S. Embassy basically was not processing requests at the time due to the pandemic and the shutdown of travel. So with Aljamain Sterling and Peter Yan sitting out on the wayside, waving their hands, yelling out, pick me," the UFC and Cejudo decided to go with Dominic Cruz. Now, Dominic Cruz has not fought since December 30th of 2016, where he lost a decision to Cody Garbrandt. Since then, since 2011, he's fought 4 times, once in 2014, 3 times in 2016. So he went from that position, I don't even think he's ranked, to fighting the champion for the bantamweight title. Schwan, help me make sense of this, please. Why did this occur? And is this really, is this the real life right now?
Well, the reason it's hard to sell the fight. It's really hard to sell the fight from a logistical point of view because you're sitting there from a logical point of view because you're sitting there and you're saying if this was the average fighter, you'd say he hasn't fought in years. We don't know what he can do. We don't know what stage he is in. He's facing a dominant champion. He's facing a dominant fighter. This fight's a farce. This fight's a trash can fire, whatever you want to call it. But the thing that works in the favor of Dominic Cruz is his history. Now, I'm not saying Dominic is going to win this fight. I'm not saying the fight is legitimate, but Dominic Cruz has taken huge breaks from fighting, and what happens every time he comes back? He beats a highly ranked contender or he beats a champion. That's happened multiple times. He came back, he destroyed Mizugaki. He just leveled him. I mean, Mizugaki wasn't necessarily a top 3, 5 guy, but he was a top 10 guy, and he was considered a tough out, and he walked right through him. He took time off, rolled off the couch, came right from behind the announcer's table, and eked out a decision win over one of the most dominant champions in bantamweight history, in TJ Dillashaw. And then he came back and he fought Faber, and he beat Faber too. So even though those fights were a long time ago, even though those fights probably weren't against athletes the caliber of Henry Cejudo, the fact of the matter is he has a history of taking months, years off, and coming back and essentially pulling out upsets against highly ranked, highly skilled, highly established fighters. That's basically what he's been known for in the past couple years. So you can kind of sell this. You can kind of sell this to the public because it's what Dominic Cruz does. He takes off for a while, comes back, and just wipes the floor with some highly ranked, dangerous fighter. So maybe he can turn the trick one more time. And if he does turn the trick one more time, there's an argument that not only is he the best bantamweight of all time, you have to start considering him as being one of the best all-time fighters, even with the lack of activity. To take that much time off and be taken on top 10, top 5, number 1 contenders and champions and wiping the floor with them and beating them decisively, that's something you probably won't ever see again in the history of the sport. You know, it's different when you have like a Floyd Mayweather who was so far ahead of everybody, but that's Floyd not having any injuries. That's Floyd just choosing to take time off and getting to pick who he's going to fight. Dominic Cruz is just picking the best person available for him to fight, and he's winning and doing so decisively. So with his past history, there's an angle you can sell this fight. I know that's the angle he's going to say. I've done it before. 3 times I've taken time off. 3 times I've come back. 3 times I'm 3-0 off long breaks against a top 10, a number 1 contender, and a champion. I'm 3-0. 2 guys who were historically 2 of the best lighter weight fighters in the history of the sport. I beat them both, coming off an extended break. So I think that's the way they're going to try to sell the fight and angle the fight. I'm sure that's what Dominic Cruz is going to do.
Man, that just does not cut it for me. When you look, the guy has not been productive in an extremely long time. And it's not even like I understand if he was getting in the cage, competing, still putting on wins and losses, et cetera, still out there being active. He has not fought in almost 4 years. In many regards, he hasn't even shown an interest in fighting. Like, has he been booked in anything between that last fight in 2016 and now, and he's been pulled out? Has he? Like,
I thought they were going to do. I thought they were going to do something with Peter Yan.
So let me see. So he was okay. Let's see. So he fought. He last fought in 2016, where he where he lost to Cody Garbrandt, December 30th, 2016. He was supposed to face Jimmy Rivera a year later, at UFC 219. But in November of that year, he suffered a broken arm and was forced off the card. So that's one. Then he was supposed to face John Lineker in January of 2019. And then he was forced off the card from a shoulder injury. So yeah, he was supposed to fight twice, and 2 injuries forced him off the card both times. Man, I don't think you booked this fight because to To say Dominic Cruz is injury prone in training is an understatement, and I hate to make that point, but you have to, at this point in time, on what, 3, maybe 4 weeks notice, your body is not at the point where you're clicking on all cylinders and you're being able to. I'm not saying he wasn't training at all, but being able to sustain the effort that's needed to put together a full camp and be able to be ready. He may not even make it to the fight. Like, that's how injury prone he is. So I don't even think you book this fight on that accord by itself. But from the storytelling standpoint, you have Peter Yan and Aljamain Sterling sitting there as top names for him to face. Those are banger fights, especially the Aljamain Sterling in fight, in my opinion. I understand Cruz is the bigger name. He is the commentator. He is the guy that fans will know. He has, he has his various shows that he puts together, promoting fights and doing the analysis standpoint of that. I get that. But from a booking standpoint, this fight does not make any sense. And I don't think you can sell it on any of those points.
Yeah, I mean, from the legitimacy point, you have better guys. You have Peter Yan, but once again, who's the best guy Peter Yan has beaten? A faded Uriah Faber. I'm not saying he's not better. I'm not saying he's not a legitimate test for Cejudo for many reasons I've talked about on Twitter. So I know he's a legitimate test. But when you really get down to the nuts and bolts of his record, who has he really beaten? Has he beaten anybody as good as TJ Dillashaw? Dominic Cruz has. There's an argument you can say. They both beat Uriah Faber. Okay, so they're a scratch on that. Both of them have beaten Uriah Faber, except Dominic Cruz beat Uriah Faber 4 or 5 years ago when Uriah Faber was in more of his athletic prime. He beat a Uriah Faber who hadn't fought in like a year or two and only had one fight in between. He's beaten the better in his last 3 or 4 fights. He's fought better competition. He's beat better competition than Peter Yan has in the entirety of his time in in the UFC in the bantamweight division. Aljamain Sterling also, he's fought some really good guys, but a lot of guys he's beaten. I mean, he lost to Moraes, who got starched and got really manhandled by Cejudo. He struggled in a fight against Pedro Munoz. It wasn't like the most dominant win. I'm not saying these guys don't have a legitimate argument as far as their rankings, their skill sets, their physical tools. I'm just saying there is a way you can spin this to make Cruz fighting Cejudo seem legitimate and reasonable. I'm not saying it is, but there's an angle you can spin. The UFC wants to take advantage of having the opportunity to have all these eyes on it. They can't afford to put in people who don't draw interest, people who can't talk, people who can't sell a fight, people who can't make Henry Cejudo look kind of dumb. Because Cejudo's a smart guy, but when his trash talk is very subpar, a guy like Cruz can expose that. You can work around that. You can build that. Peter Yan can't sell a fight. Not behind the mic, he can't. Aljamain Sterling, I don't think he can do it either. They're trying to go for the short-term big burst to get the attention, and then they'll worry about legitimacy down the line. And I don't know why anybody's shocked by this, because the UFC has always done this. I don't even understand why anybody's shocked. I don't even understand why anybody's offended. It's what the UFC's always done. So what are we talking about here?
So you said a few different things there. One, I disagree with you about Aljamain Sterling being able to sell a fight. The man can talk,
Yeah.
and on top of that, go ahead.
He hasn't sold one yet. I
He
mean,
hasn't been given the opportunity to. Like, if you look at his some of his quotes, especially recently, he says the type of shit that the UFC doesn't want fighters to say. Like his comment last week, where he was calling out people who are trying to fight for the UFC, and he's like, "And you think the UFC is going to owe you a favor?" He's like, "You got another thing coming." Comments like that. He's a lot like Kevin Lee, where he says the things that the UFC doesn't want him to say, and that is held against him. So I think that he is a different type of a promoter in that standpoint. And there, like, when I'm not gonna go down that path. He's not the type of individual that the UFC appreciates when they say shit like that. He's not a Diaz brother. He's not a Cowboy. He's not Cerrone. He's not one of those guys who can say whatever the hell they want to say and it'd be okay. Aljamain sells himself in a different type of way where he's going to say wherever he wants, and he's been doing that, especially a lot lately. Yeah, his record, like neither one, his record or Peter Yan's record holds up to Dominic Cruz's, but at some point in time, the time Dominic Cruz has been out of the cage has got to count against him, and I think that time is right now.
No, I would agree with that. Like I said, but the thing about it is in the made up fights the UFC has pulled out of their behind, Chael Sonnen versus John Jones. This is more legitimate than this. There's been other fights where it's like you see people get knocked out cold, and they're having a title fight rematch with somebody who was knocked out in the first round. Why are we having a rematch? I don't care if they defend the title, but it wasn't even a close fight. Why are we having another rematch? That fight doesn't make any sense. And some of the clown fights the UFC has put together, this is one of the ones that at least has some legitimacy to me. Once again, I understand the difference between actual legitimate, but for MMA, this is legitimate as you can go. I mean, Dominic Cruz is 3-1 in his last 4 fights. I'd say that Aljamain Sterling is 3-1 in his last 4 fights. Peter Yan is 4-0 in his last 4, but he ain't really fought nobody. I mean, and even though he knocked out Uriah Faber, and it was the knockout, if we're gonna say Uriah Faber is past his prime, and everybody says Uriah Faber's not that good technically, he's so flawed. If we're gonna say all that, then why the hell do we give Peter Yan credit for beating him? And that's the best guy. I guess Jimmy Rivera might be the best, but I was never high on Jimmy Rivera either, to be quite honest. So the best 2 guys he's beaten is Jimmy Rivera and Uriah Faber. Okay, well, we said Uriah Faber ain't great, so that win is essentially off the board. And Jimmy Rivera is good at the streak he's gone on. I don't really think much of him either. So while based on records, based on youth, based on how the fight should go technically, I see why they have an argument. None of those fights can draw interest. I can't depend on Peter Yan to hold an interview and make a fight sell. Those fights with Cruz got a lot of attention because Cruz's fight with Dillashaw, because Cruz was making Dillashaw look like a clown. The fights with Faber were interesting because Cruz had this long-standing beef, and he was making Faber look like a clown verbally. Even the fights with Cody Garbrandt, that fight wasn't any fight anybody was really asking for, but the fight got sold based off of Cruz's ability to be a pest, and Cruz making smart comments, big social media stuff, all the while building up the UFC while taking his opponent apart. Interest slowly build in those fights. So that's the only logic I can think is going. I don't think it's right. I don't think it's fair, but it is what it is. And the fact of the matter is, when it works in any fighter's favor, they never complain. If Aljamain Sterling would have got a title shot right after getting knocked out by Moraes, he wouldn't have complained. He would have took his title fight, and went on about his business. Peter Yan would have had a tough fight with Faber and would have won it, and he got a title shot, he wouldn't complain. He would thought he earned the fight. They all think they earned the fight. So by that logic, we can't go by anything. And none of them would be willing to give up a title fight to do the right thing. None of them would. So I'm not gonna get mad at Cruz for taking his shot. At least he's earned it. He's one of the top 2 bantamweights of all time. At least I can make an argument that he's getting rewarded for previous work. Maybe not current work, but previous work. At least I can make some kind of sense to me.
Okay, sir. I could definitely see your side of the story there. I just don't think that this is the fight that I would like to see. We're not going to talk about Amanda Nunes quite yet. We got a question about her. But the Lyman Good situation, he was originally supposed to be on this card too, but now he's out because of a COVID-19 diagnosis. What do you think about him revealing that information? From I guess kind of a PR standpoint, it's a good move for him, because people can say he's being responsible. But overall, do you think that that's information that the UFC wanted to get out?
I don't think the UFC wanted to get out, but I think maybe I'm sure he's just saying this because they're being honest. But I think part of it is also, I hate to think like this, but I think part of it is speaking out and sharing this to be more relatable to fans and to people who are suffering. And I hate to put it like this, but I feel every opportunity in the tragedy, pandemic, disaster, there's an opportunity to separate yourself. There's an opportunity to improve. There's an opportunity to improve your position. Saying that you're going through this and you're going through what all the regular people who aren't fighters and aren't athletes and don't work for multi-billion-dollar corporations is going through is the way to make yourself more relatable. Now, you really know what I'm going through. You're not just hearing about it. You've experienced it. You've gone through it. That makes you relatable. And being relatable is something that has a lot of value in mixed martial arts. Being a great fighter is too, but having either a personality where you stand so far above people that people want to be like you, or being somebody who people can relate to, is something that carries a lot of weight when making fights, when getting opportunities to speak, when having opportunities to get behind the what do you call it, the analyst desk. It opens up a lot of opportunities if you do it right. And once again, I'm not saying he's doing it. This being done on purpose, but I feel there's a little bit of this to it because I don't think the UFC will want to have any of their fighters coming out saying they've had it or they think they have it or anything of that nature. I really don't think they want anybody to say that.
So my mind immediately went to, if he was been training, preparing for a fight, how many other people did he come in contact with? That's immediately where my mind went, and that may I, like that's just why how I think from a being involved with the gym position, because there's no way on earth, if he was training, preparing for a fight, and he does talk about that he kept training, there's no way on earth someone else didn't get sick. I find that impossible, because of the way we know what we know about how COVID-19 and coronavirus are transmitted, how it's passed from one person to another, and the nature itself of mixed martial arts. We know that it's almost impossible for him to have been training and no one else end up with the issue, even if they were asymptomatic. So that's immediately where my mind goes, and that's been the issue, one of the main issues that so many people have been talking about when it comes to this situation, and the UFC continuing trying to push forward with events, because now that has to be the question. How many other people did he get involved with or have physical contact with? How many people did those people have physical contact with? I think it all kind of snowballs from there, and it's not an easy matter to discuss in any way, shape, or form. And I don't think that the UFC would be probably they probably wouldn't were not pleased with his revealing that news.
Yeah, I can't imagine they were. I guess it answers the question where, remember, originally I was saying that I thought that somebody might pay someone to keep quiet just because it's so problematic to find out one of their athletes may have had this issue or was having this issue because, like you said, you're training for a fight, you're training to be in a fight, and as you're training to be in this fight, let's say you find out, let's say me and you were trained together. So we're trained again, trained again, trained together. 3 weeks later, you find out you've got it. Well, that's 3 weeks you found out you got it. That doesn't mean you only had it. You just got it. Most likely means you've had it for a minute. And I've been exposed to you while you've had it. And I brought it to other people. So it opens up all sorts of questions and all sorts of problems. You know, if somebody's wife gets it or their baby gets it or their parent gets it, and they know that you ended up turning out to have it, that presents some problems. I mean, I don't know if there's a legal issue you can have. I don't know, since you chose to train with that person, you know it's a possibility. If there's anything you can do, but there's a definite question about it. Now, if somebody never announces themselves as positive, that means you could have got it when you went to the grocery store, when you, I don't know, you're at the gas pump, whatever they'll make up. But when somebody says they actually tested positive and they had to work through that, and you dealt with that person, then that's a guarantee that you actually were exposed to the disease. And you just either didn't show, either they were asymptomatic and they didn't show it and you got it, or you just were asymptomatic and getting it and you've been carrying it around to other people.
Yeah, that's a very slippery slope that we're playing with here, and that's really been the whole issue. Again, like I said, that's the whole reason why so many people from a media standpoint were raising issues with the push for all of these cards to continue going on. What are some of your last thoughts in reference to these developments with USC 249 moving on to Florida?
I'm just not shocked. I mean, I was a little shocked that ESPN put the kibosh on it earlier. I knew it was going to be remade. I knew they were going to do it around. I really thought the UFC was good, the ESPN and UFC were going to go through and have the event on the time it was scheduled to have. So that shocked me. But everything else, nah, nothing else shocks me. Like I said, the UFC is trying to curry favors with the fans by being the only live sports showing right now. And they're willing to risk fighters' hells and fighters' families' hells to make this happen. The worst thing part about this is, and I wouldn't expect the NBA guys to do this or NFL guys to do this, but you got NBA guys who make 10, even the guy on the bench makes a couple 100,000. Let's just be honest. Even the guy on the 10-day contract makes more than the guys in UFC. Guys in the G League make more than guys in the UFC. So you have those guys, and I can kind of understand why they make that sacrifice or why they'd expose themselves to that risk. That kind of makes sense to me. But some of these guys in these UFC cards can be fighting for 10 and 10, 8-8, and they probably only take home $2,000 out of it after you pay for training, food, and hotel rooms. Is that even really worth it? I mean, is that really even worth it?
According to them and the average MMA fan, it seems like it is, and they all want to fight. We know that continues to be the narrative that we're fed, even if you and I don't agree with that situation, my friend. So we're going to move on now and talk about a new topic here because it parallels directly with what we just talked about with the UFC having their event on May 9th. And that's Bellator and Professional Fighting League. And they're both taking steps to get in front of the coronavirus situation. And they're also protecting their fighters at the same time. So two different types of news broke this week. First was the PFL. News broke on Monday that they are postponing the 2020 season and they will be picking things back up in spring of 2021. And Bellator also postponed Bellator 244, which was supposed to happen in June. So look at that. Bellator, I think they canceled their event, and you got to be very careful with that terminology. So I believe Bellator canceled their event, Bellator 244, which was scheduled for June 8th, and PFL postponed their 2020 season. Now, the reason why this is so important is because we're talking about two promotions canceling events that were further out than the UFC's showcase, and they're still taking the measure to end these events. Bellator's event was supposed to happen in Chicago, and I don't know when the next PFL planned fight was supposed to occur. While we do not have word from Bellator, PFL has announced that they're paying their fighters a monthly stipend, all their contracted fighters from now until next year when they start out their new events. Bellator, they've been paying fighters their full show and win money for these last few events that they've canceled. At least Bellator 2, which one was that, 241? That they canceled the day of or something like that, or like a couple hours before. From that one on, the sentiment has been that Bellator has been paying out fighters for those canceled events. I can't confirm about all of them, but that's been kind of the sentiment. So, Schwan, when you look at these situations here, these two situations specifically, okay, my first question is, let's talk about goodwill with fighters here. MMA free agency isn't a real thing per se, in my opinion. I think it is for some people, for others it is not. I've written about this a couple times in the past. But seeing Bellator and PFL take these steps to look out for, and I'm putting that in air quotes, look out for their fighters. Do you think that builds any cachet for them with fighters as they are preparing to plan and take the next steps in their career? Can we see this be a reason that some fighters in the future make the jump from the UFC to Bellator or PFL?
I think there's a logical reason behind it. The fact of the matter is Bellator has a certain amount of appeal over the UFC just because of the issue with the sponsorship. So there's a way to make more money than you could make at the UFC. Even if you don't make top money as far as your actual pay, you can make money off of sponsors. The fact that Bellator is just coming out of their pocket and paying for fighters, even though they're not fighting, is like an olive branch. It does mean something because this is a tough spot for everybody, and people who would you say they're getting their show money and their win money?
Yeah, that was at least for that one Bellator event. They got both. They got full purses.
So you're sitting there and you're thinking, okay, I'm supposed to get 10,000, and then you get another 10, so you get 20,000. That's money you weren't expecting. I mean, yeah, you expect to win, but there's no guarantee you're going to win. There's never a guarantee you're going to win. So that's money you weren't expecting. That's an extra bonus for you when you're in a really tight spot. First of all, and so that separates it because UFC is supposedly the big name organization, the guys with all the money, the guys with the first rate operation. But for all your first rate operation and all the financing and backing you have, you're just paying, you're not doing the same thing. You're not taking care of the fighters. You're basically saying, well, y'all are independent contractors. We paid you a salary. You should have had this taken care of or addressed on your own behalf. So that's the thing that to a lot of fighters, to the big name fighters, it's not an issue. Amanda Nunes doesn't have to fight. Conor McGregor doesn't have to fight. Justin Gaethje doesn't have to fight. But the people who were check to check, who were the lower middle class, and I guess poverty level fighters, yeah, that would make a big difference. That would make a very big difference for them overall. Um, I really think the PFL situation is the best one, just because they're paying. I don't know what the stipend is. I don't know how much of the contract it is, but for you to know that every month until this is over, I'm getting a certain percent of my paycheck, that carries over more than just that one payday. You know, if it's done correctly, like, oh, every month I can guarantee I'm getting 2 or 3, whatever, the 4 or 5,000, whatever it is, I'm getting it on a monthly basis. So if this lasts for the next 6 months, I can plan out what I need to pay, what I need to cut out, what I need to do, how I'm gonna juggle things. With the one-time payment of your pay money, your show money, I mean, yeah, that's great for now and maybe half of next month. What are you gonna do the month after? We can do the month after. You don't have a fight schedule. They're not gonna keep paying you because they're not making fights. You're gonna have to fight at some point. With the way the PFL is doing it, it really seems like they're putting the fighter's best interest at heart. And not only are they saying let's be safe, they're saying we're going to pay you to be safe until it's safe for us to go again, because it's costing us money. It's costing us money regardless, whether we hold the event or not. You might not be getting 100% of your money, but if you're getting 50% of money and everybody on the roster is getting 50% of their money, it's still costing us money to not show or to have the show, and we're not making any money either. So it looks like they're putting themselves out on behalf of the fighters, which the UFC is clearly not doing, and Bellator is doing a little bit, but not to the degree that the PFL is doing.
So the next piece of that question then is, if they're building up goodwill with the fighters, do you think that this move is building up goodwill with fans as well? Does this build interest in some of the names that are in Bellator, like a Patricio Freire, a Darian Caldwell, a Doug which one? Doug Lima that is in Bellator, or a Kayla Harrison that's in PFL, a Lance Palmer, a Rory McDonald that's over there now. Does this move and the positive, I hope the positive coverage that it's getting, does this help them build some fan base for both promotions?
Well, seeing as a lot of MMA fans seem to be very heartless, I don't know that it builds a fan base necessarily. Um, but I guess for the more educated fans, the fans who really care about the athletes on all fronts and not just as a source of entertainment, I think it helps them tremendously, because it shows like you're you're running like a world class organization. You're showing some concern for the fighters. I mean, to be quite honest, if I'm being honest, it doesn't matter if it gets support from the fans, because the fans will come if there's good fights. The fans will come if there's names. The fans will come if they're getting their money's worth. Being on the good side of the fighters, where the fighters feel like they're being taken care of, which down the line is going to mean those fighters are most likely going to be willing to take some chances or put themselves second on behalf of the organization at a later date. That's what's going to matter, because there's going to be fights that wouldn't be made, that are going to be made, because the fighter's going to be like, hey, they took care of me in a tough time. I can take them for the team in this education. Or when they finally get fighters, they know we're going to get top, high end quality, well prepared fighters, instead of a hodgepodge of matchups that are just being rushed together because they're trying to get a product out.
From a fan standpoint, though, do you think that that'll cause some fans to want to learn more about this product and what they have to offer?
I don't think it helps anything with the fans at all. I mean, the fans is shown they want to see fights. Don't care about fighter health. Don't care about fighter well-being. They just want to see fights. So, in the short term, it might hurt them a little bit because they're not putting out a product. In the long term, I think it helps them, just because the fighters will have the chance to train and prepare properly. So it should be a higher quality fight. And you might have fighters who might be willing to take tougher matchups or go out and speak on the behalf of the organization and speak the joys of being at the PFL and the benefits and how it's so much better than the other organizations. That might happen, but I don't know that it resonates with the fans. The fans just want to see what they're going to see. That's been proven.
Okay, all right, some good thoughts there, sir. What are your last thoughts about Bellator and PFL taking the steps to cancel these events, even events that are even scheduled further out than this upcoming UFC showcase that we've seen?
Um, I think it's a good idea because this can't last forever. I mean, financially, it just can't last forever. So instead of taking the short money and having events right away, give it some time. Even if they don't really care about the fighters, it looks like you care about the fighters because you're here for fighter safety. In the case of Bellator, you paid them their show and their win money. You move the events back so you can see what the landscape is showing us, see if other places are opening, see if the things drop off a little bit or flatten out. In the case of PFL, it's the same thing, except we're giving our guys a monthly stipend. We're making sure they're taken care of and they have a guaranteed set amount of money they're going to get every month so they don't have the stress of having to force fights or train in a healthy situation. And that makes them look really good. And then of course they're doing the same thing, moving the events back. That way it makes the appearance that they're really fighter friendly and their main concern is the fighters and their family. Whether it is or whether it's not, that's the way it looks. And that look is going to help them when it comes to negotiating with fighters they have under contract and fighters who potentially could be under contract. They're going to remember the stuff like this. I started the UFC. I was stuck out. I was begging for fights that I didn't want to have because I needed money. And the guy who the PFL offered me, but I re-signed with the UFC, and now the guys in the PFL are just sitting back, getting their monthly money, percentage of their paycheck for doing nothing. And they know they have money coming in, and I don't. And there's no other way for me to make money because there's no other jobs opening for me right now.
All right, there, sir. Um, let's move on into segment number 3. So our third topic is listener questions, and we have 3 questions here that are pretty, I think are pretty interesting. I think, and I pretty much have a good idea of what your thoughts will be on some of these, Shawan. So the first one is reference to Lyman Good and Amanda Nunez. I kind of hinted at these earlier, but we got a question in whether or not we think Lyman Good and or Amanda Nunez will be punished for the decisions that they've made in reference to the COVID-19 situation. As we said, Good he revealed that that was the reason why he pulled out of his originally planned fight that was supposedly booked on UFC 249. And then Amanda Nunez, she said that she's not fighting, period, in this situation, that she's going to elect to put together a full camp and not do this right now. So Schwan, what are your thoughts about that here? And do we think either one of them will get punished?
Well, I mean, I hate to bring this up, but UFC does not have the biggest reputation of treating Brazilian fighters fair. They don't have the greatest reputation of treating female fighters fair, unless your name's Ronda Rousey. They don't have the biggest record of treating the part of the gay queer community particularly well, or pushing them particularly hard, or putting them out front. They don't have any of that working for them. So I can't imagine that they would even hint at punishing their double champion Brazilian female lesbian champion. I just don't know what good could come of it, even if it seemed like she was getting punished. I mean, it's one thing, Dana White can talk off a lot of things, and he can explain away a lot of things. It would be a really hard explanation to wonder why all of a sudden Amanda Nunes can't get fights. I mean, people already think that he's against her now. She can't get fights. She's not getting pushed. You're pushing all these other girls. And one of the girls you're pushing is in a division that really only has 4 fighters. I can't see it happening to her. It's just too big a risk. Too many issues could come up. And like I said before, when you're with the ESPN, a lot of stuff that happens now becomes a bigger story than it would be normally because you got that organization behind you, and they don't just pay for the content. They pay for any drama, issues, legal, whatever that stands out, because that also helps them move units, get pay-per-view buys, helps them generate interest for ratings for their show. I mean, they're partners with the NFL, but when an NFL person does a crime, how many times do you see it on ESPN on regular rotation? So if they have some kind of issue where it seems like the lesbian Brazilian female double champ fighter is getting punished for looking after her health and her family, that is just not the kind of story the UFC wants to play around with. I know Dana's very bold and very brave, but even he's got to know better than that. As far as Lyman Good, that's different. That's a different approach. He's not anybody. No offense to him. Good fighter, what I understand, a good guy. You can justify why Lyman Good isn't getting fight. You can spin that because he's not he's not a good enough fighter or impactful enough fighter in the UFC to for people to really notice it. So you can explain that away. It'd be really hard to explain someone in Amanda Nunes' position away.
I'm not going to say I expect them to get punished. I don't think they will. I think people will be keeping a close eye on that. And even if I know Lyman Good wouldn't talk out about that, he wouldn't speak about that. I think Amanda Nunes would if she was in a position that she felt like she was getting ostracized for her decision. But yeah, I don't think neither one of them will be punished per se, and I'm using that in air quotes. But I do think people will be keeping a closer eye on that because I know they can't be pleased that Nunez has decided to pull out on what would be a huge card, and they're trying to draw as much attention to it as necessary. I really hope they don't try to do some interim title bullshit either, because she deserves better than that. They can move that fight. If I was Felicia Spencer, she should hope that they move that fight for her because that gives her more time to prepare as well. She's going to need every bit of it. Same thing with Lyman Good. I hope he doesn't really get in trouble or get things held against him as well. I mean, I always forget that he's a Bellator champion, man, a former Bellator champion, and he just hasn't really been in any positive positions since. The second question we have is also in reference to UFC 249. And is it a good idea for this event to still go on this soon? Schwan, I'm going to throw it to you first, whether or not you think this is a good idea. Yes or no, and why or why not?
I don't really think it's a great idea. I just think it's going to happen because the UFC is trying to make money and they're going to hide behind the thing that their fighters just want to fight. And I think a lot of the fighters want to fight because they need money too. I don't think it's a good idea. I don't necessarily agree with it. But who am I to say somebody can't get paid? Who am I to sit here and tell them what to do with their corporation? They don't listen to anybody anyways, especially not someone like me. So who am I to question it? I don't agree with it. I don't like it. I'd rather people just get paid to sit back and be healthy and figure out some kind of new creative way to come up with some content. But that's never been the UFC style. And so I've just accepted it's going to happen.
Sorry, I was on mute there. I personally don't think this is a good idea. Uh, Not yet. We need to make sure we're in a position where we can say people are protected. With Lyman Good popping up with COVID-19, that's one case within the UFC that we may or may not know about. Like I've talked openly on this show and on the Let's Talk Wrestling podcast about the WWE and their issue with they had a talent pop up with COVID-19, and even today they had a anonymous individual call into, I can't remember the name of the official meeting, but they had an anonymous individual who claims he is a WWE employee make accusations that WWE is forcing them to perform during this time, and that he's concerned that the he in air quotes, their name was John, clearly that's not their real name, that they were concerned that the WWE is going to fire people who say that they don't want to perform during this time. A lot of outlets are reporting about that news, and I, that's a serious accusation there. And while we don't have anything coming out like that about the UFC, I just don't think that they want to put themselves in a position where something could occur. With so many different contact trackers that are out working and tracking down where people are going, where people are coming into contact with others. If something was to happen, it could be traced back to this showcase. It could be traced back to a gym. It could be traced back to a single fighter, and a fighter who may have been asymptomatic stepping into the cage and getting into a fight, getting touched by a ref who then touches his family, who then spreads it to so and so and that. Like it's so many different opportunities there that they just can't risk right now, but they're going to put themselves out there and they're still going to risk it. I just don't think that now's the time, but we're going to see where, like, one of the best quotes I've heard about the steps that are being taken to fight coronavirus was, at the end of all this, we want to hope that we feel like we were too hard or our response was too stringent, because that means that nobody you care about got infected and died. that is a key kind of quote to me because at the end of the day, Donald Trump may scream from the rooftops, we were too strict, we went too far, et cetera, et cetera. But that means that what we did worked, that the social distancing worked, that the shutting down the economy worked, et cetera, because it could have been a lot worse. And with that in mind, I think that this event may be going on a little bit too soon.
Yeah, it's not making sense, but everybody keeps arguing. The argument I always hear is, as people talk about the health or the death toll that could come up from the disease, people aren't talking about the health and the death toll that comes from when people aren't employed and people aren't working. And when in case of fighters and some of these wrestlers, you don't have time to establish another career unless you make a certain kind of money where you can expand. You don't have acting money, you don't have TV show money, you don't have TV production money or movie production money or music production money. You have what you have. You make what you earn, and if you're not working, I don't even know that they have to say they actually had to actually punish you. They're just not going to pay you. And much like the rest of us, and depending on how they live their lifestyle, they might not be able to afford to go a month or 2 months without making any money. You know, depending on how they saved, how they've earned, what they've invested their money in, they might not be able to afford it. I would think a lot of them can't afford it. So even if they don't threaten them like they're going to punish them, we just won't pay you. And when things get back to normal, we'll just reward the people who were there for us, and we'll especially in the wrestling business, will push the people back who didn't. And the UFC is not much better because they ask for a lot from the fighters, from short-term fights to fighting in a pandemic. But when you do it, all they say is, "Well, that's your job. You're supposed to take these fights. I'm not looking out for you because you did what you were supposed to do. I'll pay you your salary and we'll keep it moving."
Okay, sir. Last question we have. This is a pretty interesting one to me. We talked about PFL and Bellator doing what they're doing for fighters and canceling their events. What is it that's keeping the UFC just from making an announcement that, hey, we're going to pay fighters a stipend, period, not even outside of the pandemic? We hear so much talk about fighter pay, and Dana White gets into so many arguments with the media about it, almost on a weekly basis. What is stopping them from just saying, you know what, we're going to create a stipend for fighters, X amount of money on a biweekly basis, treat them like employees, or in that, not necessarily treat them like employees. Like WWE has like a downside guarantee structure that they pay the individuals on their roster. There's ways around this that they can keep them listed as independent contractors and still find a way to improve their pay structure. What is stopping the UFC from taking that step? The positive response, the positive press response to that would be huge in a time where they really do need it. What do you think is really stopping them from doing that?
They don't want to. There's no reason to. That's more work for them. If they do that, that does a lot. That's work for the UFC. And yeah, it pays off. And yeah, it's got media coverage and all that stuff. But it's just more work for them. They don't want to do it. They don't want to do it. That's going to require them to do more than they want to do, and they don't want to do it. That's all it comes down to. They don't want to. It's too much trouble. If I do this, I got to do this, and then I got to do that. And not only do I have to do it for this fighter, now I got to do it for every fighter, and I got to put a stipend in, and that's just more things for me to consider. I don't want to do it. That's pretty much where it is. They could do it. I mean, they signed for enough money. They got enough backing. They've got deals with ESPN too. They've got ways they could do it. They choose not to do it because they don't want to, because it doesn't benefit them. It takes time, it takes resources, and it takes money, and they don't want to spend the time, resources, or money helping these fighters. And the fighters really don't care outside of themselves. They really don't care either. As long as they're being, as we've said before, as long as they're being taken care of, they're not going to lean on the UFC. They're not going to push back against the UFC. They're not going to do anything to upset the UFC. So once again, the UFC doesn't care, and the fighters don't care enough to make it a big enough stink or take action against it to create an environment where the UFC has to care.
Do you think we'll ever get to a point where that actually happens?
I like to say, yeah. I like to think at some point people are going to stick together and start making stands. But human nature is pretty selfish, to be quite honest. And I haven't seen, like I said, I would say somebody in the, like when the UFC got bought out by the Fertitas, they had to make a sacrifice. I know they're rich, but they had to buy in. They had to risk their reputation, their finances, whether it's their dad's money, their money. They had to take a risk to make this happen. Nobody who's a fighter seems to want to take the risk to their career to make sure that other fighters, future fighters, other people in their division are taken care of. They all do what is best for themselves. That's all they do. They take fights that are best for themselves. They take deals that are best for themselves. They take opportunities that are best for themselves. Nobody says, I shouldn't get this title fight, give it to him. That never happens. Nobody says, let me fight the toughest matchup so that I can let somebody else who's worthy of a title shot get one. Never happens. Nobody says, hey, if I'm getting paid $1 million, I want to make sure my opponent's getting paid $1 million. Maybe Conor McGregor, that's his stick. Red panty night, I get you paid. Who else does that? Who else cares? They say that's not my business. I'm just here to fight, do the best I can. And until someone decides they're going to put other people first, it's going to keep moving this cycle. The UFC and their investors are all focused on making each other money and taking care of one another. The fighters are only concerned about taking care of themselves. And until that changes, the UFC will always have the upper hand, and the UFC will never have any real leverage or pressure to get things done. I know I'm not going to pressure them. If the people in horrible circumstances aren't gonna try and do better or fight better, why am I taking time out of my day or interrupting the jobs I have to do or interrupting the money I can make or time with my family so I can fight a battle that you're unwilling to fight? What sense does that make?
True thoughts there, sir. We are going to begin closing out our show today. But before we do that, Schwan, please let everybody know what you are working on. Give everybody a preview into your head. What's going on up in there?
I just been kind of bouncing around a couple pieces. It's hard. I guess it's the stuff I'll do will be more kind of cover a variety of things, usually in the women's MMA sector, maybe MMA overall. I did have my Daredevil pieces come out 2 weeks ago. Thank you for everybody who supported it and checked it out. But probably just talking about training habits and some thoughts I have as far as how fighters are being developed, that kind of stuff.
True, true. I am working on my typical MMA and pro wrestling coverage. You'll find all of that on this channel here. Let's Talk Wrestling. That next episode will go up on Thursday. I have a little bit of content to catch up to, but stay tuned for that. You can go over to MMAratings.net, which is our flagship, to read all the content that Adam Martin's putting together and rate our fights or rate the fights. Let us know what you're thinking about mixed martial arts and a lot of those battles that are coming up or those that have happened in the past. Along with that, you can find us on YouTube, Google Podcasts, Apple iTunes, and Anchor as well. Spotify, if I haven't already mentioned that. And our YouTube channel is MMA Ratings. So with that in mind, we're going to go ahead and close out. Shwana, thank you for joining me once again and doing all that you do each and every week. We'll be back here next week and have a great day, sir.
Yeah, everybody enjoy your week. Stay safe. Raphael, meet me in order to reach me at.
Yep. See you guys later.
All right, sir.